Former undercover cops of Reddit, what is the craziest thing you had to do to not blow your cover? Before we start, welcome back to Reddit Stories Hub. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Here, we'll be telling you interesting, thought-provoking stories from Reddit. So, get comfortable and let's jump right in. Story 1. Know a guy that used to work undercover for the DEA in Mexico. He infiltrated multiple gangs and cartels and got lots of higher-ups arrested. He told me about one occasion when some of the cartel leaders pulled him into a shed. There was a guy tied up, on his knees in the middle of the floor. They handed him a revolver, said the guy on the floor was a mole who had leaked info to the cops, and that he was to take the gun and shoot the guy in the head. He was freaking out because up until that point, he hadn't had to do anything near that violent. He knew he couldn't blow his cover, so without hesitation, he walked up to the guy and pulled the trigger. The revolver was loaded with blanks. They wanted to test his loyalty, because they suspected him of being an undercover cop. He ended up getting everyone there arrested a short time later. This guy also had a couple fingers missing and claimed he lost them in a horse riding accident. After knowing more of his history in the DEA, I wouldn't be surprised if the real story was more gruesome. They ended up having to pull him out of Mexico and into hiding because somehow he got made and the gangs started going after his family. Story 2. When I first got started in forensics, it was when chat rooms and webcams were taking off, so pedos thought they'd be able to figure out who was who on the internet, since clearly, you'll know you're webcamming with a 40-year-old dude munching on donuts instead of a 14-year-old girl. I was a naive 18-year-old woman who was just getting started in policing, doing some clerical work for my hometown police department, when I heard a couple people talking about how they were having a hard time chatting up creeps now that webcams were a thing. I told them why not just hire someone to act like an underage girl or boy and coach them on what to say and how to set up meetings to catch these a-holes. Lo and behold, I volunteered myself for the job. We set up a bedroom in one of the upstairs offices, complete with a bed, a desk, and some posters from one of the officers' teenage daughters. I had to wear some of my high school sports clothes or pajamas while talking to predators via webcam. I passed notes back and forth with the team of officers and passed it off as trying to do homework while chatting. The hardest part was to still seem interested and innocent while this dude on the screen is telling me what type of horrible things he wants to do to my body, thinking I'm still a child. Story 3. I made my partner blow me. Well, not exactly, but we were at midnight following a burglary team. We were sitting in our unmarked auto in an alleyway when they made us. I had no other play except to grab Richie by the back of the head and shove it into my lap. One of the team comes up to the car, says something unfortunate about our assumed sexualities, and proceeded to knock the place over. These guys were in the cells all night screaming that we were blowing each other. The bad guys went away for a little while. I got to write the most epic report in the history of policing, and Richie got a medal for blowing me, mostly because I told every living soul who would listen. Story 4. My mother was a Los Angeles police officer for most of the late 70s. Because she gives 0F, and as hard as they come, she was selected to go undercover in the Hillside strangler case, and spent most of December 1977 and January 1978 pretending to be a prostitute in and around Los Angeles. Basically, she would get gussied up and hang out in parks, looking to get picked up. She actually had a conversation with Bianchi when he pulled up to check her out one night. She was too old, 28 at the time, to fit their profile, and they didn't take her. I had the mustard to accuse her of fibbing once, and she responded by producing photos she snapped of the van they were later found to have used. Scary shit. Story 5. A long time ago, I was working in a remote region, not in the USA. There was a former American guy who ran the place we were staying. He told us a few stories about his time undercover. I didn't realize at the time, but he could have been in witness protection. I won't give any details about the city. So, he was a cop back in the 70s undercover in a biker gang that had a big drug ring going. I got the feeling he was UC for a couple of years at least. He made good friends with the main dealer in the gang. The dealer had a sweet Mustang at the time, and they'd drive around the city together. One day they were behind a school bus, and some girls in the back row were making eyes at them. At the next stop, the girls got off the bus and got in the Mustang, and they took them back to the dealer's place and slept with the high school girls and gave them coke. I didn't ask, but I imagine the girls were 17 to 18. I, being naive, asked whether they, as you see cops, cops, had to take the drugs to keep their cover. He said his personal rule was no needles, but he'd do everything else the dealers were doing. Story 6. Without letting out too much detail, I was undercover for about 3 months when a local head of, let's say, bad guy group wanted a hit on a rival that was in the area short-term dealing. I was with one of his, let's say, soldiers. At the time he was told this info. They were supposed to be about 6 minutes from us. So, we headed there in an SUV to do the deed, just him and me. And my mind was racing trying to figure out how to not participate. Needless to say, we got to the area said rival was in, and it just so happens that the police were dealing with said rival and were escorting him to the back of a police car, busted with a shit ton of H. We killed nobody that day and said rival was locked away eventually. I'm not sure what would have happened had the local PD arrested this guy, but I surely wasn't going to kill anybody. Talk about luck though. I left LE soon after that and got a career in trucking. Worth it. Story 7. My dad did undercover for several years and talked about a meth head that he hung out with all the time and even babysat her kids when she went out to get high. This went on for several months while they were figuring out who the big dealer was and acquiring warrants. He grew a beard, had a fake ID, drove an old shitty car. Eventually they got warrants to bust a bunch of people in the drug ring, and he actually was part of the SWAT team at the time and was part of the group that smashed indoors and arrested her and a bunch of others in the area. He had to wear a balaclava to protect his identity when with the SWAT team. He said it was actually really difficult because he had become an important part of those kids' lives and was kind of attached to them, and now they had no mother and had to be taken to Child Protective Services. I never got to ask him more questions about this before he passed, but I have no idea how he balanced this crazy second life and then came home and acted like a normal husband and father in our family. Story 8. I know a guy who often went undercover as a junkie. He was committed. He'd stop showering for a while before a gig and piss on his tracksuit before going into work. He was so good that he managed to get the same dealer convicted twice in the space of a year, and they never suspected he was the rat. He had multiple police records under different names too. Story 9. Not a cop, but a guy my mom dated for a long time was. The old guy, in his 70s now, he was fresh out of the academy and at the Asbury Park riot. Sad scary shit. And then was an undercover narcotics cop for 14 years during the 70s and 80s with the NJSP. He was Puerto Rican and spoke Spanish, was an ex-Marine, and became a state trooper. They utilized his ability to blend in with organized crime in the Latin community. He had to do coke in front of a bunch of dudes during a buy one night, and basically stuck his knife in and blew a mound up his nose. Then he started having a minor paranoia/panic attack that they were going to find out he was a cop, thanks to the gram of blow he just took to the dome. He was breathing heavy and went out for air, his heart was pounding out of his chest. Panicking over how to get out of it, one of the gangsters came outside to talk to him. He's ready to run or fight. Guy goes, "Man, I've never seen someone snort that much at once, man. You okay?" He sighed a huge sigh of relief, and was like, "Yeah, I never did that much. I'm having trouble breathing." The guy was really nice, brings him a drink, and they smoked a cig. Everyone is joking that he has the heart of a lion to take that much. He actually felt bad about locking that one guy up when it all went down. Think he said he tried to help him or get a reduced sentence or something. Story 10. My cousin was an undercover ATF agent. Anyway, they were trying to bust some guys for illegal alcohol distribution and were building a rapport by going undercover. My cousin doesn't take his ATF badge with him when he's undercover because if anyone ever saw it, he could get shot. Anyway, some hot-headed black and white cops came over and started harassing them. My cousin couldn't blow his cover, but pretty soon the police started getting physical, and they beat crap out of my cousin and the guys he is trying to get evidence from. They take them all to the police station only to find out that my cousin is ATF. My cousin was pissed because cops aren't supposed to beat people up. He is currently filing a lawsuit against that police department. Story 11. I'm not a cop, but I worked forensic psych for over 15 years. Not long after I got started there was a story in the newspaper about a young cop who had just graduated from the academy. He was young but looked very young, like 16 to 17. So, the powers that he decided to put him in schools to combat the growing drug problem, and he was playing a high school student interested in buying/dealing. Apparently, all went well for a while, but then he started using cocaine. This was in the very early 80s. His habit got so bad it was noticed by his superiors, and he was arrested. So, they sent him to us to see what the F went wrong and if he was responsible for being addicted to coke. He looked so young and scared that I felt sorry for him. Not only was his career ruined, but he was also charged legally with drug charges, and now he was in a psych hospital. All this to say, when he got to our hospital, he had a hole in his nose in the septum from snorting so much cocaine. He eventually was convicted, and I forgot how much time he was given. Story 12. I was AUC. I regularly worked ruses because I don't look like what I did, and I was really good at it. I'm not in law enforcement anymore because of medical reasons. The craziest thing I did was to let the suspect get close enough to me to think he could influence me. He thought I was a dumb 20-something looking for a job. To be fair, he wasn't a bad-looking guy, but with what this guy did, it's a hard no. Selling him on being innocent and naive, I got layouts of his offices, computer counts for evidence and seizure, and identified co-conspirators in the scheme. The indictment was under seal, so my identity was never revealed. Unfortunately for you guys, it's not more glitz or glamour. It was a financial fraud case. Story 13. I once knew a guy who became best friends with the son of the leader of the mob as an undercover cop. He would hang out with this guy and help with extortion and drug dealing as a way to gather evidence against the family. When it was time to become a madman, the Don told him that the only way to truly know a man is to watch him take a shit, and then have him watch you take a shit to see the reaction. He knew what doing this would get him into the family, so he went ahead and did it. When the Don took a shit in front of him, the smell was so disgusting he almost vomited, but he knew doing so would make him a dead man, so he just stood there and watched. It's crazy the things undercover cops have to do. Story 14. My criminal investigations professor in my sophomore year of university did some crazy shit back in the 80s in West Germany. He was AUC there for about 5 years. One story he told involved a case he had been working for about 6 months, drugs and weapons, nothing too insane. He was about to buy a key of coke off a mark, and apparently one of the other guys in the house had been suspecting my prof of being AUC for a few weeks, and because he was more senior than the guy my prof was buying from, he made the decision to off him and was informing the other guy. My professor was fluent in German but pretended he didn't speak a lick of it, so these guys had the whole conversation within earshot of him. I don't know the exact details of how his backup was arranged, but he gave some kind of signal to one of the guys outside who shot in through the window, and my professor, rather than just tackle the guy who had the gun, threw a frigging coffee table at him. Like, hulkied out, picked up the coffee table in the center of the room, and threw it at the guy. Obviously knocked him out cold. He got a lot of shit for that for the next couple weeks because it was a bit excessive, but honestly, if you're in a house full of drug dealers in a foreign country thousands of miles from home, and some dude says to the other people in the room that he's gonna take you out back and shoot you, I feel like the natural reaction would be grab nearest thing and throw. Story 15. My father-in-law did undercover work in the South. Early 80s, there was a brutal robbery/murder of an old woman in the town, and the cops knew without a doubt it was her son, but couldn't pin it for one reason or another. So, the son's walking free and they decide to try and get him to admit to it with this crazy plan. Father-in-law goes undercover and starts hanging around this guy, tells him he needs a hitman for a job, super easy, big money. Tells him he has to have experience, hoping the guy would be like, oh yeah, well, I've killed before, I'm the guy for this. But instead he says, oh, I have just the guy for you. He just returned to town. Important to note here, the guy who just returned to town is black. Not wanting to blow the cover, my father-in-law plays along and asks to meet him. He tells my father-in-law the street name of this guy. Father-in-law looks him up in the prison system, and sure enough, this guy's an accomplished murderer who just got out of a notoriously rough prison in USA. So now they have this other guy on their hands that they don't need, and he's more dangerous than the one they're after and ready for the job. They don't want to blow the cover, but they have to figure out how to get rid of him. So, they decide to set up a meeting, print out some white supremacy shirts, and get some other officers undercover into this bar with the shirts on, and my father-in-law. He is sitting at a table with his gun directly underneath, just in case things get hairy. Tells the guy that the job he was doing would be for one of these guys. Guy noped the F out and walked away. They eventually got the murderous son on another murder later. Story 16. Not me, but a family friend of mine worked 10 plus years as a NYC undercover cop. He's seen a lot of messed up shit, but this is one of the funnier stories he's told me. As an undercover, he would always wear these outrageous costumes and disguises. One of them was as an Hasidic Jew. Apparently there was a lot of crime going on within their community with drugs and whatnot. His job was to go into an illegally run brothel for a bust and give the go for a SWAT team to bust in. He and his partner, both dressed up as Hasidic Jews, walked into the brothel, which according to him was a disgusting rundown apartment. Trying not to blow his cover, he continued pretending to be a customer. One of the girls took him into a room for what she thought was down and dirty time. Once he got into the room, his job was to text and let the SWAT team know it was go time, but he had a major problem: he had no service. He then had to stall for as long as he could, hoping that the SWAT team would get a hint, or he would hopefully get service. He argued with the girl about money, saying he wouldn't pay the agreed amount. He then proceeded to tell the girl what he would want her to do without doing anything sexual himself, followed by saying he was too nervous to do anything. He basically just rambled and distracted for as long as he could until the SWAT team finally busted in. Story 17. A really close friend of mine still works undercover in a high crime rate area in a place I won't mention. He even swore me not to tell anyone outside of our very close circle. He's told me some crazy stories, but the worst one was when he had already made a drug bust and went to court, and the whole process. Guy does time. Well, apparently, the guy got out less than 2 years later. My friend works miles away from where he lived. Apparently, he's out with his wife and 5-year-old and runs into the same guy in the street. Said guy is with 2 other friends, and after a brief stare run to their car as he's putting his child in his car. He gets chased downing the car by these guys while they're waving a gun at him, trying to swerve him off the road and make him crash. He said after what felt like forever, he sees flashing lights and he pulls over while the other car tries to get away. He gets pulled out at gunpoint and slammed to the floor in all the mess. The dealer and his homies finally got stopped, but I don't remember how they finally got stopped. Guns drawn, people getting slammed down, all because they thought the cars were racing. My friend finally is able to show them ID and badge after a cut eye and some other nonsense. Guys get arrested again and goes to court. All in all, he and his family were safe, but he had to move again and now completely understands the negative connotation towards cops because of this. Story 18. I have a friend who is a police officer. She did undercover work as a prostitute on the Indiana/Illinois state border. Man, they made her look cracked out. Need I mind you, she is very pretty. She got a few Johns, and I think one of them had a warrant on him for weapons. So, it was a double win/win for her that day. I find it fascinating how anyone in law enforcement can do this. It must be an adrenaline rush, because if you get caught, yikes. Hats off to all of you ladies and gentlemen who do this in your line of work. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.